there's a steep learning curve, right? And every parent is scared that, if they do that, that the outcome could be fatal. But it may be anyway, regardless of what you do. Um, you know, I've talked to a lot of parents whose child is overdosed and passed away right in their own home. So, you have to make some tough decisions, and you have to learn how to back off and let them learn from some of the natural consequences. Jail time, don't go rescue them. And I didn't have to do that with Chase, but I did learn, and in talking to a lot of other parents, in that situation, they get a DWI. You don't go bail them out. You let them have to deal with some of that and struggle and learn and grow. And it's a tough situation to find yourself.
Hello and welcome to the Disrupt the Everyday podcast. We're here to help you navigate life while disrupting the status quo. Our discussions cover a number of topics relevant to everyday life. We discuss everything from relationships to entrepreneurship. We also engage in some difficult but important conversations. And now, here are your hosts, Brian and Tanya Hamilton.
Welcome to another episode of the Disrupt the Everyday podcast. On today's episode, we're joined by Darryl Rodgers. Darryl, thanks for joining us today.
Thanks for having me, Brian and Tanya.
Mm-hmm. No, happy to have you on. Now, we've gotten to know you a little bit, but we want to make sure everybody gets a chance to know you. So we're going to ask the loaded question that we use to open every show. Who is Darryl Rodgers?
I am a husband and father. I'm a Christian. And I would say that, now I am a family recovery coach, speaker, and author. I lost my oldest son in a drug-impaired wreck in 2014, and that led me down a road of, I started out with a book that I wrote about him, and then into drug prevention speaking. And from there, sort of a pathway into the family recovery coaching, which is coaching parents who have a child with a substance use disorder.
All right. Well, the first thing that I'll ask Darryl is if we could just talk a little bit about your son, Chase, and kind of the incident that, led to his death as much as you're comfortable sharing.
Oh, yeah, sure. Chase was a great kid growing up. He was diagnosed ADHD early on, which I find that is there's some sort of, and I think it could be one of several factors, but there's definitely a correlation between the ADHD diagnosis and kids that develop a substance use disorder. But Chase, great kid, easygoing. Most of his issues related to the ADHD were focus issues in the classroom. But he was a good athlete, great hand-eye coordination. Both of my boys, Eagle Scouts. So we spent a lot of time together outdoors. I'm an outdoorsman, and though I haven't been very active at that in quite a few years, but camping, I'll just always doing things outdoors with them and going to all of their sporting events. Chase played several different sports, finally narrowed it down by the time he was entering high school to, actually even before that, he had narrowed it down to football. And not very big for a football player, but what he lacked in size, he made up for with love of the game, tenacity, hustle, and some quickness and agility. And he played cornerback. He was a defensive back. And he was struggling a little bit. He was struggling a little bit with his grades, and in about the middle of the 10th grade, never have been a standout student, but not a bad student. But now his grades are really plummeting, and he was just developing an attitude and becoming sort of rebellious. And I have a military background, and I felt like that we could move him to a military school. I thought that the structured environment and the discipline would be good for him. His grades did improve. We moved him there in the middle of his junior year. His grades improved, and he graduated. He had a really, really outstanding senior year of football there. And unfortunately, it wasn't long after he arrived at college that he began to. Oh, and I forgot to mention that I'm getting ahead of myself a little bit, but he did earn a football scholarship
Uh-huh.
to a smaller school, not a Division I school, but he, within a very short period of time after he arrived there, he was beginning to hang out with kids who were abusing drugs and alcohol, and pretty soon he was abusing drugs and alcohol. He dropped out in the second semester of his freshman year, came back home, immediately gravitated to an even rougher crowd. Once he got back home, he moved out at one point. I kept up with him on social media. He was losing weight rapidly. Just looking at his posts, the pictures he would put up, losing weight rapidly. He wasn't a very big kid to begin with. Now he's just rail thin, pale, glassy eyed. And some of the people he was hanging out with, just, some of the photos he posted, it looked like they were all holed up in a hotel room, strung out on drugs. I became very alarmed as a parent, and I began to Google the word intervention. It just sort of popped into my head. I'd never watched the show Intervention, never watched a full episode, but I had come across it a few times, enough to get the idea. Now, my father was a Southern Baptist preacher, and I grew up in a very strict home with very loving but strict parents. And there was never any addiction in my family that I'm aware of. I did not see any of that. So all of this it just blindsided me. Didn't know anything about addiction, didn't know anything about the drugs at the time or what was going on with any of that. And anyway, I did reach out to an intervention company and hired an interventionist to come to our home and do an intervention for Chase here in our home. And quite an experience, but through that intervention, we were able to get him into treatment in South Florida. He was in treatment for 30 days. Then he went to a halfway house, bounced around to several different halfway houses there, and spent a total of about 9 months in Florida. Came back home, was doing a lot better when he got back home, was staying away from the people who had been a bad influence before, was staying sober, was going to IOP, intensive outpatient care, 2 nights a week, kind of like group therapy. He wanted to go. I never had to remind him to go. He was there like clockwork, and got a job. We felt like we had the old Chase back. And when I say we, I mean my wife and I, and all the rest of the family, and his good friends, his really close friends. And this was the Chase that we knew. But over the next several months, he began to relapse. At the time, I didn't know what was going on exactly, but I sort of had a second sense that just told me he was headed in a bad direction again. And he came to me one day and told me, "Dad, I'm headed in a bad direction, and I'm hanging out with a rough crowd again." And I said, "I know." And he said, I don't know how to cut ties with these people, but I know I need to. And he told me, "I've taken a job transfer back to Florida, back to the area where I was in treatment." He told me when he was planning to leave. I told my wife, Kim made Chase promise that he would come by and have a meal with us before leaving for Florida. Well, the day came that he was supposed to come by and eat with us. He didn't show up. Again, later in the afternoon, we moved to the living room, Kim and I, and our younger son, Justin, who was in the 8th grade at the time. We're just kind of sitting in the living room, hanging out, watching a little bit of TV, talking back and forth, surfing our phones a little bit. And I had a phone call from one of my friends, and I didn't want to disturb Kim and Justin with my phone conversation. So I went outside. It was May 29th, 2014. Beautiful day out, blue skies. I'm standing out in the front lawn talking to my friend on the cell phone call, and a City of Raleigh police cruiser pulled up to the curb in front of our house. And I watched this officer got out of his car, started up my driveway, and I told my friend I need to go. Apparently Chase is in some kind of trouble. He'd never been in any trouble with the law before, but I just suspected, he was headed in a bad direction. So I met the officer there in our driveway, and that's where he told me, "Mr. Rodgers, there's been a bad wreck out on I-40, and your son died at the scene." And of course, that's really hard news for any parent to hear. I tell people this part of the story is like right where we were standing, almost in that exact same spot. I couldn't tell you how many times I threw Chase a pass, football. and we'd throw the baseball around. We kick the soccer ball around right there in the front yard. And, there was this long pause after he told me, that Chase had died, because it took a little while for my mind to grasp that, that is really what he said. And finally, he asked me, was there anyone inside that that he could notify, that he needed to notify? So, well, my wife and my other son are in there, but I feel like that's my job. Let me do that. And so he asked if he could go in with me for support, and I agreed to that. And he went in with me, and I broke the news to Kim and Justin. It was tough, and we all, cried, and it took a while to settle down. And we asked the officer what had happened, and he told us that, he didn't really have a lot of information that day, but as the days went by, we began to hear some rumors. One was that Chase, some of his friends said there was a big going away party for Chase the night before, and they woke up late the next morning. They felt hungover. They decided to go to the park and smoke some marijuana. And the park was within walking distance of our home here, and this part was in the police report, so I know this part is accurate. They did go to the park. They did smoke marijuana together, and then they got into Chase's car. He got in the front passenger seat of his car, allowed a young lady to drive. She was 18. They had dated at one time, had a bad breakup, so we were surprised they were even together. She smoked with them too, and then another young man got in the back seat, and they made one quick stop, grabbed a bite to eat right out onto I-40 and right into rush hour traffic. And they only made it a couple of miles after that stop. It really only maybe 4 miles from our home, I'm guessing. And she lost control of his car in a curb, running about 70, and the car left the road, struck a tree, and Chase died at the scene. We believe probably on impact. And the other two, it took firefighters about an hour to get them out of the car.
Oh, wow.
It was so twisted around the tree. Then they got them to the hospital right away with serious injuries. They recovered over the next several weeks to the extent they could come home and continue their recovery there. But then 7 months later, just a few weeks prior to her what would have been her first court appearance, the driver took her own life. It's just a really tragic story. And talk about a ripple effect. There's a lot more to the story. I don't have time to I know you don't have time on this show for me to tell you all of it, but it just keeps going in terms of how many people were impacted negatively. And so that's kind of what got me started down this path of like, man, I don't want any other parents to have to experience. I know they will, but I want to do whatever I can to minimize that so that other parents don't have to experience what we've experienced with losing Chase.
And what about Chase's friend who was in the back seat?
Yeah, he survived, and I haven't looked to see how he's doing lately. The last time I checked, he was still. I just want to say, last time I looked, it looked like he was still hitting the weed pretty
Struggling.
hard,
Yeah.
Yeah, and I haven't seen any evidence of a change of attitude or change of heart or change of direction, with him. He had some really serious injuries, with his legs. His legs were crushed. That's another story in itself, and in a couple of different books that I've written. And in the beginning, I really, really reached out to him and tried to see what I could do to turn him, to try to get him on the right track. And he just wasn't ready yet. And anyway, there's kind of a barrier between us right now. I would be open to having a discussion with him, but he's not willing to talk to me, I don't believe. But unfortunately, I wish, there's some things I could have handled better with all of that. There was definitely a phase where I was dealing with some anger
Oh,
issues.
absolutely. Yeah, fair enough. And on his end, I'm sure those feelings of guilt, like there's probably so much, being that only survivor and that, that accident and just so much stuff that he has to deal with too on his end, right?
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, in a lot of ways, if I could talk to him today, you know what, I would say, man, you're tough. You're still
Mm-hmm.
here, and you're still hanging in
Mm-hmm.
there. Um, I don't see any signs of him being receptive to a conversation with me right now, but maybe that'll change at some point.
Mm-hmm.
I hope so.
Wow. So I just wanted to go back to Chase in high school. He was busy, he was athletic and all that. Did you guys see was there any drug use or any signs of that in high school, or did that really just start in college?
Um, you know, when kids go down that path, they're usually not very honest with their parents. And I will tell you this, that growing up, Chase was honest almost to a fault. That if I asked him something, even if he knew it was going to get him in trouble, he'd tell me the truth. And I noticed in some of those issues I was talking about in the 10th grade was when I caught him in some lies about a few things. And that really was disturbing to me because that was so out of character for him.
Mm.
But he told his mother he did not start until he was at military school, and then while he was there, he just drank some wine on a couple of occasions. He tried some. Oh man, I'm trying to lose it. I'm trying to remember what it's called now, but it's a synthetic marijuana. It's not even really marijuana. It is, but it's just something made um, to sort of give the same feeling, supposedly, that marijuana does. Some of the same feelings, and anyway. So he tried that, and I don't know I don't think he smoked any marijuana while I was there, according to him, but I think so. I think there may, I've always wondered, was there some
Mhm.
experimentation going back to the 10th grade? And did that lead to, because all of a sudden I was seeing these big shifts. But if that were the case, I have no way of knowing. No one's ever really, none of his friends have ever told me that. And I never got it from him. So.
Okay.
Now, when the substance use became something that you knew was a problem, what were some of the differences that you saw in the behavior? You mentioned the dishonesty was one of the key things, but again, just some of the changes that you've noticed, so again, parents know what to look out for.
Yeah. Well, most of his use, from everything I can gather, was the marijuana. And then, he was experimenting with some other things, some other drugs like Molly. I don't know what else he experimented with. I think there might have been some cocaine on an occasion or two. I don't think there was ever any heroin use. And this is all just, I'm just guessing based on what I've heard and talking to him and talking to his friends. But, all of his friends were like, man, he just wanted to know, where's the weed? Where's the weed? So the one thing I can tell you about the marijuana use is demotivation. Don't want to do anything. They're just all motivation is not all motivation, but it's a little bit of an exaggeration, but it's not too far off. It really affects their motivation. So, I mean, that's one thing you can look for. Of course, they're really good about covering up things. But bloodshot eyes, glassy eyes. Certainly he started with a lot of weight loss. Now, you typically don't think of that with marijuana use, but I've heard other parents say the same thing. Whereas the marijuana is the big problem. And what a lot of parents aren't aware of, is that, I'm going to tell my age a little bit here, but I graduated from high school in 1978, and the marijuana, and I never used it. Just wasn't interested. I was headed in a different direction, but I have friends who did. And the marijuana that was around them was about 2 to 3% THC content that most people were using. And it stayed that way through the mid 90s. And today, on average, is probably close to 25%. And I'm talking about the leaf or bud. And then when you get into the wax extracts like dabs, there's even THC crystalline. It can go with the dabs. It's around 60% THC, and then it goes on up to close to 100% THC content. So, I think a lot of people downplay how dangerous and what a mind altering substance the THC is, but they don't realize how it's not some people smoking some weed anymore. It's a serious drug.
Mm-hmm. And just going back, like with his ADHD, because sometimes they say there is that correlation where it helps to have that focus. Did he ever mention that he found that beneficial?
Well, not directly, but I can tell you that when he knew that his ADHD meds, which we always kept him. First of all, we didn't want to put him on the meds. We got some pressure from one of his teachers and early on, and we fought it for a little while. And then, we realized that he, occasionally he could be very hyper, and he really had a hard time sitting still. And we realized that it was going to be an issue for him in school if we didn't do something. So we did eventually, have him tested and then put on a very, very low dosage of Concerta. We always kept it as low as we could. And then, I can remember a couple of different occasions when he was in middle school going through growth spurts. Suddenly his behavior changed. And I realized that, it's a growth spurt. So we had to bump it up just like to the next notch, and that we could do on dosage. And, but now I'm kind of wandered off a little bit. I'm trying to get back to your original question about the ADHD.
And the focus, with the marijuana use.
Yeah, definitely. So he knew that the Concerta would affect his appetite, and he was already having a tough time gaining weight for football, and so he took himself off of the Concerta when he was in college, and that's shortly after that was when he began his marijuana use, marijuana, alcohol, cigarettes, all that kind of came real close together. I think it's hard to separate one from the other. And then pretty soon with the partying, the Molly and, who knows what else. But yeah, so I definitely think that there is a correlation there because, I talked to a lot of kids in my speaking and all that have had issues with ADHD and some with drug use. And they're like, it obviously they have their brain doesn't produce dopamine the same way that our brains do. And so the drugs kind of stimulate the dopamine production. And a lot of them tell me, I just don't feel normal sometimes, especially I think once they've been introduced to the ADHD medication. So I don't know it's hard to tell parents. If I think if you have a kid that's struggling with ADHD, if you can, and if you can swing it and you can if you got the finances to be able to do it and you have the ability to be able to, one of you stay home with that kid and really give them a lot of attention and homeschool, I think that's maybe one solution there, and try to help them develop coping skills. And if you can keep them off of the meds, keep them off of the meds. I know there's a whole spectrum because I've seen it, because I used to have a day camp for boys that were ages 8 to 15. And I've seen the whole spectrum of ADHD, and Chase was kind of on the lower end, but yeah, if you can keep them off of the meds, then I would say, do it.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
So I guess with the substances, I guess will kind of serve as a replacement when these kids age out of the meds.
Yeah, I talked to his pediatrician later a couple of times after he died. And one time just happened to bump into her at the airport, and we had a conversation about it. And one of the first things I heard her say was that he was self-medicating. And I guess she sees that a lot. When they come off the meds, then they find some type of a replacement a lot of times.
Mm-hmm.
Now, one of the other things too, we always focus on these situations on, what we could have done better. But what were some of the things that you were confident in the action that you took post this event?
Yeah, and I'm not scared I'm not afraid to tackle the things that I could have done better either. I'm at that point now where, looking back, I can go, well, yeah, there's a lot of things I could have done better. And if there's something I can share with parents that will help them, I'm willing to do that. I will say this, when I talk to parents out there, most parents who find themselves in this situation with a child who has a substance use disorder or a child that has died as a result of one, either way, there's a lot of blame and guilt there, and they all are like, what could I have done better? And I messed up as a parent. And there's 3 C's that a group known as Al-Anon, I'm pretty sure this originated with them. And, you didn't cause it. You can't control it. You didn't cause it. You can't cure it. You can't control it. And I like to add 3 more C's to that. And that's, you can contribute to the solution or the problem. It's up to you. And your communication. Communication is key. Communication. Work on trying to learn how to communicate with them better. And then the final C is you can change, because you really don't have any control over them. They're their own person, and the drugs have a louder voice than you do as a parent. So sometimes the more proactive you try to be, the more you push them and try to point out to them what's wrong, the more of a wedge you drive there, and it just exasperates the situation. So there's a better way to do it. You have to work on changing yourself, getting stronger, and trying to be a positive influence, and beginning to let go more and allow them to make some of their own mistakes and suffer from some of the consequences. Now, here's the hard part of that, is that there's a steep learning curve, right? And every parent is scared that, if they do that, that the outcome could be fatal. But it may be anyway, regardless of what you do. I've talked to a lot of parents whose child has overdosed and passed away right in their own home. So, you have to make some tough decisions, and you have to learn how to back off and let them learn from some of the natural consequences. Jail time, don't go rescue them. And I didn't have to do that with Chase, but I did learn in talking to a lot of other parents, in that situation. They get a DWI. You don't go bail them out. You let them have to deal with some of that and struggle and learn and grow. And it's a tough situation to find yourself in. Looking back, what could I have done better to have prevented it? I don't know that there's anything I could have done to have prevented it. I wish that, things I could have done better for sure. I wish I had been more approachable and been more open. If Chase had a problem, he would go to my wife, and then she would come to me, and I think that's really typical of a lot of men, that the boys, or not just the boys, but daughters too, a lot of times dad is the disciplinarian. And so they're going to go where they think they're going to get the easier answers or whatever. But, and it doesn't always work out that way, and sometimes my wife, like once we knew Chase had this problem, man, she was like, she was more hard line than I was on some things. I was out there trying to figure out how to solve this problem and trying to fix it. And anyway, it's a tough thing for parents to go through.
Mm-hmm. And then you had, your other son, did you say Josh?
Justin.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
It's funny because I have 2 brothers, Josh and Justin. So there you go. Okay. I won't forget that. But then just thinking to you find this information, you're dealing with like behavior and all these changes, you and Kim, right? And then you still have Justin in the home, who obviously is a lot younger. And so what he's witnessing, what he's seeing that mom and dad are stressed probably when Chase leaves the house, right? How were those days? And anything that you would like to share for parents who are in the middle of that right now?
Those were tough days. There was a lot of stress there. And Justin and Chase totally different and personality wise. And I know other parents who have more than one child have probably seen that. And Chase, I could sort of, before the substance use became an issue, I could sort of lean on him in a direction that I felt like he needed to go, which was not really good, but I could sort of lean on him, and he was going to try to please dad. He was going to, even if he didn't want to do it, he would go along to get along. And Justin, very stubborn, very headstrong, not like that at all, would push back, and he would let me know too. And so we had some flare ups a little bit for a little while. And then I realized at some point, and this was really after Chase had passed away, and I was really doing a lot of self-reflection, like how can I be a better parent overall? How can I, be a better parent to Justin? And I realized I needed to back off and let Justin make some of his own mistakes and make some of his own decisions and live with them. And man, when I did that, it totally flipped, so that when he left to go to college, they're 7 years apart. And when he left to go to college, like I mentioned earlier, he was in the 8th grade when Chase died. But when he left to go to college, he would call me from college and ask me questions. But Dad, what do you think about this? What do you think about that? And advice. Sometimes it was girls, girl advice or whatever. And but it was really flattering to me that he thought enough of me to ask me those kind of questions. And the relationship has continued to deepen since then. He recently graduated from college. He is a chemistry major. He did play football in college and Division II school, and he's been accepted to 5 different chemistry PhD programs, and he's narrowed it down to 2, I think. And so he's trying to make that decision now. So we're really proud of him and what he's done. Not too long ago, he all of a sudden developed an interest in aviation. I have an aviation background, and so he's doing some things with the Microsoft Flight Simulator. And he asked me to come basically fly co-pilot for him and handle all the radio communications. So, it's a great bonding experience for us. So, really good relationship with him, and really, really proud of how he's matured and come through and weathered all of this,
Absolutely. Now, for parents who, have maybe younger ones at home and want to avoid them going down that path of substance use, what advice could you share for us to make sure we're instilling those values in our kids, or just, again, pointing them in the right direction?
Well, it is so tough out there today. I would say, if you have younger kids, particularly, when my kids were coming up, social media, the internet, wasn't brand new, but it was fairly new. And I did not really, looking back on it now, I would say, man, wish I had maybe had a contract for them to sign. Like, hold off, I would say, as long as you can on giving them those devices. And when you do give them, have them sign a contract. There's some contracts you can find online, or you can develop your own, or you can modify something that's already out there. But have them sign that contract so that they understand that these are the rules. These are the stipulations to be able to. I'm providing you with this device. I'm paying for it. and I'm paying for the service. And so if you're going to use it, you have to abide by these rules. And if you don't, here are the consequences. And if you have that all spelled out in advance, then when you have to take it away, and you probably will have to, maybe once, maybe several times, but when you have to take it away, then there's no need for anybody to raise any voices, or you're just like, sorry, you broke the agreement, and here's where you went. Here's where you broke the agreement. These are the rules you agreed to, and this is what we're going to do. And that prevents a lot of arguing, and and that's another thing is that again, back to the military, I could have a booming voice, and I could really get their attention if I needed to, but I think there's a better way to handle it. I think if you can not let them, if you can just maintain really good control over your emotions when you're dealing with these issues, and just be almost deadpan, this is the way it is, and I'm sorry, but you have to stick to the rules. You can't. I think it's very tempting when you see them, and that brings up one more point, that if you make the consequences too severe, then you're going to be tempted to lift them, and then that sends the wrong signal. That sends mixed signals that, if I just wait it out, mom and dad will lift these consequences. So I think it's important to be steady and true and consistent with all of that. Watch their friends and who they're hanging out with. Know the parents of the friends, all of that. And, there is a transition where they're transitioning from a child into an adult through those preteen and teen years. And you have to learn to let go a little bit, gradually, a little bit of that control, so that by the time they're 18, they're still going to need you for some things, but you want them to be basically an adult who can handle things on their own by the time they're 18 years old, and that's a tough thing for parents.
Yeah. Yeah, I was just thinking that control, right? Like our kids, we have an almost 14-year-old, twins that are 11, and then our 6-year-old. And I even like that first time you drop the oldest one off to go to the movies with the friends and stuff like that. It's like you see it goes in gradual stages, right? So it's not just bang, but still all those times it's like, oh my goodness, like he's away from me for X amount of time. Oh gosh, I hope he makes good choices, right? And that's hard because we know that we can't keep them locked up in our houses forever, as much as we would love to do that. But I think another major point would be like just making sure our kids are well equipped with coping skills, because I think at drug use and even just different ways of dealing with stress, dealing with all these emotions and stuff like that, if they don't have those coping skills, they're gonna look elsewhere, right, to find the easy quick fix that maybe friends in high school, friends in college, their teammates and stuff are going to offer to them. So that just, sort of came to mind, that as we're parenting from, toddler and up, those are things that we can work on instilling in our kids.
That's a very, very good point. Because I can tell you that, a lot of times it starts off with peer pressure, but if they have any kind of underlying psychological issues, there could be some trauma there. And when people hear me say that, I think most people's first reaction or first thought is that, child abuse, in the home, but that's not. The trauma could come from a lot of different places. And I'm not saying that trauma's always present in these situations, that's always the cause, but, it could be from something that happened when you weren't around, or something that happened at school or whatever. all drug use, all substance use is almost all of it is uh, an attempt to find a coping mechanism. And they found a very unhealthy coping mechanism. So that's a great point. Teaching them how to develop those and really working on building their confidence, everything you can do to build up that confidence, so that when the peer pressure comes, they're a little bit more immune to that than most kids would be.
Mm-hmm. And another point too, we were at our son's high school orientation a few weeks ago, and the guidance counselor was just sharing with all the students, like be involved, get involved, whether it's sports, any extracurricular activities, the arts, anything, because he was saying the more you're involved, the more you're going to want to go to school, number one, the more you're going to feel that you need to be held accountable. And like he just kept listing off the different reasons and the benefits for this, right? Because we know as teenagers, the last thing they want to do is listen to their parents, right? But if they know that they have to be at school, they have to get this assignment done so that they can go on the trip or what have you, they're going to have that focus, right? They're going to have those goals that they can set, and it goes with the coping. But I just think like really just making sure our kids are involved and really being held accountable by not just us as parents, but other people as well.
Yeah, that's a good point.
Mm-hmm.
I agree.
Now, one thing I want to kind of circle back to was that you did decide with Chase that, you were going to bring in, have an intervention. For a parent who's thinking of taking that step, what are the kind of some of the signs that, they need to go that route?
That's a tough decision. And I tell parents, that it doesn't hurt to get a professional opinion on when you're ready to take that step. A lot of parents are scared to do it, and I've seen some parents not do it when I felt like they should, because I think there's a fear there that they may have a bad reaction to the intervention, and then they may move out and they may never see them again, or it may lead them to do something else, take some type of action. But I think, I can't tell you I don't have any figures to tell you what the success rate is, but I think it's probably pretty good. That they're really good. Interventionists are usually really good at knowing how to get them to say yes to go into treatment. Trying to think of what to tell them. First, if you feel like that's the direction you need to go, get some wise counsel, and don't hesitate, because things can spiral out of control very, very, very quickly. If they're, if they've overdosed before, that's, you might want to have an intervention. If they're just really, really, really doing, engaging in dangerous activity, almost all of them are going to drive impaired or ride with somebody else who's driving impaired. It's just, they're playing Russian roulette. And with the drugs that are out there today, you've got fentanyl. We had 108,000 overdoses in the U.S. last year. And fentanyl is a big part of it. The fentanyl is a lot of the other drugs, even the marijuana is often laced with fentanyl. A lot of these kids, they're taking a pill that they thought they were getting a Percocet or something like that. And it turns out there's fentanyl in it, and they OD. So the risk are astronomical now. So I would lean towards having it. If it's always better to get them to want to go on their own, but that can take time. And in the meantime, you're sort of you're taking a risk. You're throwing the dice. But having said that, I will say this, that treatment is not a cure. It gives them a chance for their brain to heal. They do learn some healthy coping mechanisms in treatment if they get into a good program. And a lot of times they will relapse at some point, but it's a good starting point.
Mm-hmm. Oh, sorry.
No, go ahead.
Sorry.
No, that was great. And as I'm just thinking, so parents who, are married in the same home, and then also parents who aren't in the same home, co-parenting and stuff. If there was ever a time to put differences aside and be able to co-parent, a situation like this would be it, right?
Oh yeah, for
So,
sure.
what could you say to parents, whether in the same home or separated? How could they work together to help direct their kids?
That is a tough one because a lot of times they're not on the same page, even regardless of whether
Right.
they're living in the same home or not. Um, and it doesn't matter. I mean, the roles can go either way. Like sometimes the mother will, you come to a point where sometimes you have to give them that ultimatum, like you're going to have to move out, or better ultimatum might be, we'll pay for treatment. We're going to have this intervention, and when we have the intervention is that's what it comes down to. You've got two options: you pack your bags and move out, or you're going to treatment. And that's a scary thing for parents. But a lot of times, it's sometimes the mother, sometimes it's the father that's like, I don't want to issue that ultimatum. I want to keep them in the house. And then just because it's so scary, it is scary. And, I would recommend going to a marriage counselor if they're married. If not, going to a therapist and try to go to somebody that can help you find some common ground there on the steps that you need to take. Either way, you're going to have to find a way to work together. You're going to have to come to an agreement on the best approach forward. And because it's just vital that you be on the same page. They need to set that example for their child. It is hard enough if you're both on the same page, but if you're both going in different directions and you're fighting over how to handle it, it just adds more chaos.
Now, I'm just curious, in the time that you've been doing the work that you're doing today, what have you been able to learn about recovery from addiction?
It's not usually a straight line. A lot of times, like I mentioned earlier, there's a relapse. And as I just mentioned, it's always better. You can't force someone to want to recover. It's always better if it's their idea. There are ways that you can, through communication, through learning how to communicate, that you can be a positive influence and sort of nudge them in the right direction. And it's there's a process that you can learn. There's the book Beyond Addiction is really good. I recommend it. It's a thick book. If you don't want to read the whole thing, get it on audio. I highly recommend the chapter on communication because there's a process that a lot of therapists use called it was right on the tip of my tongue. I just lost it, but it's motivational interviewing. And so you're learning how to sort of uncover the things that they really, really, really want. What were those dreams that they had before they got involved with substance use? And how can I get them excited about those things again? And then as they're trying to make some progress towards those things, or whatever it is they're trying to do in their life that's of a positive nature, there are times when it's going to come up that the drug use is going to get in the way, or the alcohol, or whatever it is. And that's the time to have those discussions, but you have to be careful how you have those discussions. You don't want to lecture. You want to stay away from lecturing, and you want to learn how to be a really good active listener, and learn how to validate what they're saying, because a lot of times they're going to be irritable. They're going to be angry, as you know, because of the side effects. If they can't get their drug at a particular time, they'll be angry, and sometimes they may lash out at you. And I would say respond, don't react. Validate what they're saying. It doesn't mean you have to agree with what they're saying, but what I think I heard you say was this. Is that right? And a lot of times they don't need you to solve their problem. It may sound like that they're asking you to solve their problem, but they just need to vent, and they need to know that that their opinion is valued. And if you just validate their feelings, hey, I understand. This is what you said. I believe you said this. Is that right? Yeah. I understand how you feel. Again, you're validating those feelings for them. And if you get into that whole lecture mode of, if you keep doing these drugs, this is going to happen and that's going to happen, that just backfires. That pushes them in the wrong direction. So like I said, really encourage reading that book, reading that chapter. And I would start with that chapter and then get back and read the rest of the book. But it is a good book. Highly recommend it.
Excellent. Well, Darryl, I appreciate you taking the time to share all of this with us. Now, before we wrap up tonight, I just wanted to make sure we let people know where they can connect with you and just see some of the things that you're doing. So for those who are watching, you can see that below there. But for those who are listening, if you go on IG, if you go on Instagram, D Rodgers with a D 61. If we're looking at Twitter, it's at JD Rodgers 61. And on TikTok, it's at the Family Recovery Coach. And then, of course, the website is, if it'll pop up for me here, it's thefamilyrecoverycoach.com. Darryl, just in terms of the work that you're doing right now, what can we look forward to, in the future from you?
Well, I'm working on something that's really exciting right now. I'm working on putting together 2 events, kind of back to back. One will be sort of a broader scope event about substance abuse, and how we can solve that problem. And so I'm planning to have a lot of different speakers at that event. We're probably looking about 90 days out from now for that event. I'm in the early planning stages now. A lot of different speakers from different backgrounds in the in that arena, involving substance use. And then after that, I'm planning about 30 days after that, probably, to have a 3-day virtual event for parents who have children with a child with a substance use disorder. So when you hear virtual event or like a 3-day virtual event, like, how am I going to sit in front of a computer for 3 days? Right. But trust me, I've done it, and I was like glued to my seat the whole time because I've been in some of these events. If it's done right, it's almost like being there live with some advantages. You don't have to you don't have to buy airline tickets. You don't have to book a hotel, and you can sit right at home and you'll hear some great content. Most of these types of events, you get a little swag bag or swag box that comes in the mail, and I've made some really good friends through those types of venues. You have opportunities for breakout discussions with other people who are going through the same thing you're going through. So I'm really looking forward to that, and I hope people will be able to join me there. And I wish I had some dates to give you and some more information, but I would say just watch my website for some updates.
Well, that's great. I think the biggest thing is that I think every parent's prayer is that their child would not get into this. But I think it's so important that as parents, we can't be naive to the fact that, oh no, not my child. My child would never do that. Right. So even just, learning your information, just getting from what you were sharing today and what you do is being proactive as parents, right? Being well equipped, because we don't know what's going to happen down the road for all of our children, for, each household out there. But I think it's just really important to just as parents be as equipped as we can to navigate when we get to those situations, if people do.
Absolutely. Yep.
Awesome. Well, Darryl, again, thank you so much for taking the time to speak with us today, and just sharing some stuff that's very personal, and and just navigating that the way you did. I know I know you've been doing it for a long time, but it's probably still not easy to have these conversations.
Yeah, it's tough, but there's been a lot of healing and being able to share Chase's story, and hopefully, say something that will help some other parents out there, some other kids who hear the story. Um, that's it's a way for me to keep Chase's memory alive and to make something good out of this tragedy.
No, absolutely. Well, again, thank you again, Darryl, and for everyone who watched or listened, thank you for letting us disrupt your everyday.
Thanks for listening to the Disrupt the Everyday podcast. For more ways to listen, connect with us on social media. To be a guest or to partner with us, check out our link tree at Disrupt the Everyday. Join us next time for more ways to disrupt the everyday.